Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and crimson. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the remnants of dinner, Laura's signature spaghetti carbonara. It was her way of smoothing over the rough edges of an increasingly tense household. We weren't fighting, not exactly. But something had shifted in the past few months. Her smile seemed thinner, her laughter rehearsed. The warmth that used to define her presence had turned into a strange, distant chill. That night, her phone buzzed on the counter as she loaded the dishwasher. The sound drew my attention. I watched her movements carefully. She glanced at the screen and hesitated. Her fingers hovered, and then she pressed a button, silencing the notification. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Work," she replied without meeting my eyes. "One of the new interns has questions about the upcoming conference." Her tone was breezy, dismissive, but her body language told a different story. She turned her back to me, busying herself with stacking plates, but her shoulders were tense. I wanted to believe her. After all, we'd been married for 10 years. I'd never had a reason to doubt her before. Yet, that small, inconsequential moment planted a seed of suspicion I couldn't ignore. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more. Late-night calls that she took in hushed tones, claiming they were last-minute work updates. Texts that she'd read and quickly hide. A new outfit she purchased for a team-building dinner. Each event seemed trivial on its own, but together, they painted a picture I wasn't ready to see. I kept quiet, playing the role of the trusting husband. But the growing tension between us was impossible to miss. We no longer shared our usual Sunday mornings, lounging on the couch and flipping through travel magazines. Our laughter, once a constant melody in our home, was now replaced with an uncomfortable silence. It wasn't until one particularly restless night that I decided to investigate. Laura had gone to bed early, citing exhaustion from a long day at work. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. She had forgotten to silence it. I leaned over, careful not to wake her. The screen illuminated the dark room, revealing a message that made my heart pound. "Can't wait to see you again tomorrow, babe." It was from someone named Tony. The words sent a wave of nausea through me. My mind raced, trying to process the implications. I had no doubt that this message wasn't meant for me. The casual familiarity, the unmistakable intimacy, it was all there, glaring at me like a flashing neon sign. I spent the rest of the night pacing the living room. By morning, I was no closer to understanding how this could have happened. Laura and I had built a life together, a home, a marriage, shared dreams. How had we ended up here? When she walked into the kitchen the next morning, her hair still damp from the shower, I watched her carefully. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, her demeanor as cheerful as ever. "Morning, honey. Coffee?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. She moved around the kitchen, humming softly as if nothing was wrong. The sight of her calm, collected facade made my blood boil. How could she carry on like this while betraying everything we'd built together? I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I began to observe her more closely, piecing together the cracks in her carefully constructed story. I noticed how she avoided eye contact when her phone buzzed, how she suddenly seemed overly concerned about her appearance before heading out. Each detail added weight to my suspicions. Then came the day I found the itinerary. It was tucked inside her work bag, a glossy brochure for a luxury spa resort. The dates matched the weekend she claimed to be attending a team-building retreat. That was the moment my doubts solidified into certainty. Laura was planning a romantic getaway, with Tony. I sat on the edge of our bed that evening, staring at the brochure. My mind was a storm of emotions, anger, betrayal, heartbreak. But amidst the chaos, a plan began to take shape. If she thought she could deceive me and get away with it, she was gravely mistaken. I didn't confront her about the brochure. Instead, I played along with her lies, feigning ignorance. When she told me about her upcoming work trip, I smiled and wished her well. She looked relieved, almost smug, as if she'd pulled one over on me. Little did she know, I had no intention of letting her betrayal go unnoticed. The week leading up to Laura's work retreat felt like a slow march toward an inevitable storm. Each evening, as she chatted about logistics for her trip, what she'd pack, who she'd be meeting, I nodded along, feigning support. Inside, every word she spoke fanned the flames of my anger. When she wasn't around, I dug deeper. I knew her email password, an old habit born of trust, back when I thought we had nothing to hide from each other. I scrolled through her inbox, looking for anything that would confirm what I already suspected. At first, there were only innocuous work emails, client updates, meeting schedules. Then, buried in her archives, I found them. Emails to Tony. The messages started off professional, just like the ones she had sent to other colleagues. But as I scrolled further back, their tone shifted. She teased him, calling him a charmer, and he responded with jokes that danced on the edge of propriety. The most recent emails left no room for doubt. They were planning their getaway together, complete with dinner reservations and spa treatments for two. I closed the laptop and stared out the window, my hands trembling. It was one thing to suspect infidelity, but seeing the evidence laid bare was a different kind of pain. My wife, the woman I had trusted above all else, was betraying me in the most intimate way possible. I decided to bide my time. On Friday morning, as she packed her suitcase, I kissed her goodbye at the door. She smiled, thanked me for being understanding, and promised to call when she arrived at the retreat. I watched her drive away, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and resolve. As soon as she was out of sight, I grabbed my own bag, one I had packed the night before, and headed for the airport. I had done my homework. Their resort was an exclusive luxury retreat 2 hours away by flight. I booked myself a room under a fake name, ensuring I would have a front-row seat to the unraveling of her lies. The flight was uneventful, giving me plenty of time to rehearse the confrontation in my head. By the time I arrived at the resort, I felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap. Checking in was nerve-wracking. I kept expecting someone to recognize me or for Laura to walk past at any moment. But luck was on my side. The concierge handed me my key, and I made my way to the room unnoticed. My first priority was scouting. I walked the resort's grounds, blending in with the other guests. It wasn't long before I spotted them, Laura and Tony, lounging by the pool. She was laughing at something he said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The sight sent a jolt of rage through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I spent the rest of the afternoon observing them from a distance. They were painfully predictable, sharing drinks, holding hands, exchanging lingering glances. Watching her act so carefree, so utterly at ease in her betrayal, was like a dagger to the chest. But I didn't let my emotions get the better of me. I had a plan, and I was determined to see it through. That evening, I approached their table at the resort's restaurant. My heart pounded in my chest as I walked up to them, but my face remained calm. Laura was mid-laugh when she saw me. Her smile froze, and the color drained from her face. "Mark," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good evening, Laura." "Tony." I nodded at him as if we were old friends. He looked confused, glancing between us as he tried to piece together the situation. "And you are?" he asked, his tone cautious. "I'm her husband," I replied evenly, savoring the way his expression twisted from confusion to shock. Laura started to speak, but I raised a hand to cut her off. "No need to explain. I think I've got the gist." I turned my attention to Tony. "I hope the two of you are enjoying the weekend. It looks like Laura put a lot of thought into it." Tony mumbled something about not knowing she was married, but I barely heard him. My focus was on Laura, who looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. "I'll leave you to it," I said, my voice cold. "Laura, I expect you to be packed and out of the house by Monday. Consider this my formal goodbye." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving them to stew in their guilt. My steps were steady, my expression unreadable. But inside, a storm raged. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my sense of self. I spent the night at the resort, replaying the confrontation in my mind. It wasn't perfect, I had wanted to stay composed, but the pain in Laura's eyes had shaken me. Still, I knew I had done what I needed to. She had made her choice, and now she would face the consequences. The next morning, I checked out and caught the first flight home. My plan wasn't over yet. The confrontation had been the opening salvo, now it was time to secure my future without her. The flight home was quiet, though my thoughts were anything but. The image of Laura's pale face and Tony's stunned expression replayed in my mind like a looping film. For years, I'd been the devoted husband, the steady rock she could lean on. But now, I was done playing the fool. When I arrived home, the house felt different, emptier, though Laura's things were still everywhere. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, mocking me. I resisted the urge to throw everything she owned onto the front lawn. This wasn't about petty theatrics. This was about taking control. I walked to my office and pulled out the folder I had prepared earlier in the week. Inside were copies of our financial documents, proof of her affair, and my plan for moving forward. I had already consulted an attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Carla who didn't waste time sugarcoating the situation. She assured me that with the evidence I had, I'd come out of this divorce with my assets and dignity intact. As I sifted through the papers, I came across our wedding photo. We looked so happy in it, her head resting on my shoulder, my arm wrapped around her waist. I stared at the image for a long moment before tossing it into the trash. That chapter of my life was over. By Sunday evening, I was ready. I had moved my most important belongings into a spare room, leaving the master bedroom for Laura to pack up when she returned. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to see the life she had so carelessly destroyed. She walked through the door late Sunday night, her suitcase rolling behind her. The moment she saw me sitting in the living room, her expression hardened. "We need to talk," she said, her voice sharp. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, now you want to talk? By all means, go ahead." She set her suitcase aside and crossed her arms. "I know what you think you saw at the resort, but it's not what you think." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Really? Because what I think I saw was my wife on a romantic getaway with another man. Care to explain how that's not what it looked like?" Her face flushed. "Tony and I are just friends." It was innocent. "Spare me the lies, Laura." I stood, my voice rising. "I've seen the messages, the emails, the itinerary you so carelessly left behind. You've been cheating on me for months, and you expect me to believe it's innocent?" She opened her mouth to protest but quickly closed it, her eyes darting to the floor. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. "I want you out by tomorrow," I said finally. "I've already spoken to an attorney. We're done." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "Mark, please, can't we talk this through? I made a mistake, but I love you. We can fix this." I shook my head, my heart hardening against her pleas. "You didn't make a mistake, Laura. A mistake is forgetting our anniversary or burning dinner. What you did was a choice, a deliberate betrayal." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. She had cried her tears for Tony, she could cry them alone now. As she stumbled over her excuses, I walked past her, heading for the stairs. "I'm done talking. Good night, Laura." Upstairs, I locked the door to the spare room and collapsed onto the bed. The confrontation had taken more out of me than I expected. My chest ached with the weight of everything that had transpired, but I knew I was doing the right thing. For once, I was putting myself first. The next day, Laura was gone when I woke up. Her suitcase was missing, along with a few of her personal items. I checked my phone and saw a single text from her. "I'm sorry. I'll be back later to get the rest of my things. Please don't hate me." Hate her? No. That would imply I still cared enough to feel something. I spent the day meeting with Carla to finalize the next steps. We went over the documents I had gathered, making sure every detail was in order. The evidence of her affair was damning enough to ensure I wouldn't lose the house or the savings we had built together. By the time I left Carla's office, I felt a rare sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I had a clear path forward. When Laura returned that evening, I stayed out of her way. She packed her things in silence, her eyes red and puffy. At one point, she tried to speak, but I held up a hand. "Just go, Laura. There's nothing left to say." She nodded, her shoulders slumping as she carried the last of her bags to the car. When the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness, anger, and, most surprising of all, freedom. In the days that followed, I began to rebuild. I reached out to friends I hadn't seen in years, buried myself in work, and even took up running again. Each step felt like shedding a piece of the life I had shared with Laura, a life that no longer defined me. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the loneliness threatened to overwhelm me. But every time I felt myself slipping, I reminded myself of the man I used to be, the man I was working to become again. Laura had made her choice, and I had made mine. Now it was time to move forward, leaving the wreckage of our marriage behind. The weeks after Laura's departure were a whirlwind of adjustments. Life without her felt strange, like walking into a familiar room where all the furniture had been rearranged. I had the house to myself, free of her lies, free of the tension that had built up over the past year. I was learning how to live again. One crisp Saturday morning, I was jogging through the park, a habit I'd picked up to clear my head. The air was fresh, the trails quiet. My mind was beginning to quiet too, the memories of Laura and Tony slowly losing their sting. Then I saw her. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. There, sitting on a bench beneath a canopy of oak trees, was Laura. But she wasn't alone. A man sat beside her, and it wasn't Tony. He looked older, with salt and pepper hair and an air of confidence that seemed out of place next to her subdued demeanor. My first instinct was to keep running, to let her remain a ghost of my past. But something about the way she looked caught my attention. She wasn't smiling, wasn't laughing the way she had with Tony. Her posture was rigid, her face pale. She seemed uncomfortable. Curiosity got the better of me. I slowed my pace, taking the long way around the park to get a better look. As I passed closer, their conversation drifted to my ears. "You can't keep doing this," she was saying, her voice low but sharp. The man leaned in, his tone calm but menacing. "I think you've forgotten how this works. I can do whatever I want. You're the one who made the deal, Laura." "The deal? What deal?" I stopped in my tracks, stepping behind a tree to listen. My pulse quickened, not from the run but from the unmistakable tension in their voices. "This wasn't what I signed up for," Laura said, her words trembling now. "You promised." "I promised you excitement," the man cut her off. "And you got it. You're just upset because it didn't turn out the way you expected." Laura's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't expected: regret. Real, raw regret. I walked away before they noticed me, my mind racing. What was this deal she had made? And who was this man? I tried to brush it off as none of my business, but the look on Laura's face haunted me. She wasn't the same woman who had boldly walked out of my life. Something, or someone, had changed her. That evening, as I sat in my living room, sipping a glass of whiskey, my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Mark?" The voice on the other end was shaky, almost unrecognizable. It was Laura. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone colder than I intended. "I need to talk to you," she said. "It's important." I hesitated, torn between hanging up and hearing her out. Finally, I sighed. "Fine. Make it quick. Not over the phone. Can I come over?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. 20 minutes later, she was at my door. She looked different, disheveled, weary, as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders. "What is this about, Laura?" I asked as she stepped inside. She didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she handed me an envelope. "Just read it." I opened it to find a series of legal documents, along with a photo of the man from the park. As I skimmed the papers, the pieces began to fall into place. The man was a private investigator, hired by Tony's wife. The documents outlined a carefully orchestrated scheme. Laura hadn't just fallen for Tony, she'd been lured into an affair by him as part of a twisted game. His wife, a wealthy socialite, had orchestrated the whole thing to set Laura up as the scapegoat in their divorce. In exchange for money and influence, Laura had unwittingly become part of a long con, one that had left her stranded when Tony's wife decided to pull the rug out from under her. "I didn't know," Laura said, her voice breaking. I thought Tony loved me. But it was all a setup. And now you want my help?" I asked, incredulous. "After everything you've done?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Mark. I didn't know who else to turn to." For a long moment, I just stared at her. The woman standing before me was a shadow of the confident, manipulative person who had shattered our marriage. And yet, some part of me felt a flicker of compassion. Not for what she had done, but for the person she had become. I walked to the fireplace and tossed the envelope into the flames. Laura gasped. Why would you do that?" "Because I'm done," I said simply. "I'm done letting you and your mess dictate my life." She stood there, stunned, as the papers curled and blackened in the fire. Finally, she nodded, a strange mix of relief and sorrow on her face. "Thank you," she whispered before turning to leave. As the door closed behind her, I felt something I hadn't expected: closure. Laura's betrayal had broken me, but it had also forced me to rebuild, stronger than before. Whatever happened to her next was no longer my burden to bear. The flames crackled softly, casting a warm glow across the room. For the first time in months, I felt truly at peace.